Alias name asks, can you explain a bit which is better, a device with 16/128 or 32/128? Reason is we think about ordering a 16/128 device with two 5L16A1 probes and the corresponding wedges. Is this outdated or just enough? Hi Alias, thanks for the question. For those few people who don't know what alias name is asking, here's a background of what the question means. So XXYY naming convention is used where XX is the number of pulsars and YY is the number of receiver paths. The number of pulsars will define the maximum number of elements that can be grouped together to form the active aperture or the VPA, virtual probe aperture. Number of receivers will define the total number of elements that can be used for sequencing apertures that lead to the potential increase in coverage from single probe footprint. Also, remember this, the number of receivers, YY, is always greater or equal to the number of pulsars, XX. Okay, and typically it is 16/16 or 32/128. So as we saw, XXYY is the number of pulsars and the YY is number of receiver paths. Okay, number of receiver paths is always greater or equal to the number of pulsars. So 16/16 or 32/128. Now, for example, let's consider you have an instrument that is 16/128 and you have a transducer that is 5L64. You can fire 16 elements at a time all the way from the first element to the last element in sets of 16s, right? Whereas if you have another instrument that is 32/128, you could fire 32 elements at a time. But if you're going to use 5L16 transducer, you're still going to fire only 16 at a time. So in your case, when you're going to use two 5L16s at the same time, you're good with 16/128 instrument as long as you're using a splitter and you connect those two 5L16s to your splitter. Okay, you don't really need a 32/128, but you could use 32/128 if you want to use a higher number of elements at a time. So 16/128 is not really an outdated one, but typically if you're on the field, you would prefer 32/128. So you can use a bigger transducer, which allows you to have multiple groups in the same transducer and also fire more number of elements at the same time using 32/128 as compared to 16/128, which might result in better resolution and more depth of inspection. Typically 16/128 is used for training, and as far as I've seen on the field, most people use higher than 16/128, but there is nothing wrong in using 16/128 if you are only going to use 5L16s. I hope that answers your question, and let me know if you have any more doubts.